Hey y'all, today we are working on the jet boat. As you can see, I have the carburetors out for one of the motors. It has two engines. Each engine has dual carburetors in it. We're going to be rebuilding the secondary carburetor, which is going to be that one there. I've already gone through and cleaned it, so we're just going to be assembling the pieces. As we assemble it, I'll go through the ins and outs of all the parts required. So let's get started. We got the order from Summit Racing, 2 springs, 2 valves, and 2 rebuild kits for the carburetors. The next step is to inventory all the pieces that came out of the carburetor compared to what is in the kits to see what I have to reuse and clean up. So I'm going to do that now. So I went through and organized everything. We have unused parts from the kit. We have here are our old parts that are going to be replaced with the new parts, and then I have the parts that need to be reused. And in the directions, what I did was I noted that this is going to be for the secondary, not the primary, and then the parts that need to be used in the secondary are a little different than the ones that are noted on here. So what I did was I went through and I highlighted each piece that I'm actually going to be using from the kit, which is this section. Right, and then I highlighted here the parts that aren't included in the kit that I'm going to have to reuse on the disassembly. And where I got this list is I essentially took and I looked at the items that had the replacement parts, and anything I have left in here is essentially what is going to be in this list, right? I also went through and highlighted the pieces that I'm going to be using from this kit here so I can identify them more easily. And again, this is the Mikuni BN 38, not the 44, just ignore that piece, but the 38 piece. The diagram here that you're going to see, we're not using these pieces, which are the ones up here. This is actually for the primary, right? So that's why I have this marked as secondary. We're not going to be using a lot of these pieces, which are actually used for the fuel pump, essentially. This controls the fuel coming from the tank. The secondary doesn't. It actually gets a return fuel through a secondary system. This is kind of how I have it break out to help myself get organized. There's a couple key pieces when you're pulling that kit apart, the new one. There's a couple of clear little plastic pieces. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see them. Right there. Be very careful. Any gust of wind will take them away, and they're very hard to see. So be careful with those guys. When you're looking at the valve body here, that is where that replacement is, right there. So, all right, now that I have everything organized, I can get started actually rebuilding the secondary. So let me get this guy set up down here, and we'll get going. Okay, our first step is going to be installing hardware that we first pulled off. The hardware that we pulled off was the low-speed jet and the high-speed jet, just to make sure they're okay, 35 and 36 accordingly. Those get installed back into the high speed being right here, the bigger guy, and the low speed being right here, the smaller guy. The next step is from your new kit, installing the valve body gasket. So that's this weird looking guy, and that just goes right in there and sits like that. Alright, after you have the valve body gasket in, the next step is the actual valve body itself. And we need to install, number 12, which is going to be the check valve, right? So on this guy, there's a little clear check valve right there. That's what we're going to replace. I left this together just so I didn't lose the hardware right here because there's a screw and a retainer. So I'm going to replace that now. I'm just going to set down the camera just because I'm going to need both hands for this, pulling that off so I don't lose that, and also so I don't lose the new one from my kit that I mentioned prior. So give me some time to put this together, and then I'll show you how to put it into the carb. Alright, so now that I replaced that check valve on there, just to let you know, on this I used a PH0 screwdriver to get that off. Took a little bit of force, but it came off. Then you just flip this guy over and place that right in there on that valve body gasket, and that's the valve body, of course. And then we have 2 screws we got to put in here. Those 2 screws are going to be existing screws that we took off our kit. those two screws correlate to 40 on our list right there. So those guys just go right in here, there, and there. Alright, so after the valve body is secure, the next step is to install the needle valve. This actually comes with the needle and the valve. That is going to get put right down there. And then we're going to use this retainer clip and that screw to secure, or sorry, not this screw here, that screw with the little washer to retain it in place in that hole right there. So this is going to take a little bit of force to get down in there. There is some lube on it already that I've noticed, but I'm just going to need 2 hands here to put that in place. Alright, now that I have the needle valve assembly, or the body, in place, I do need to put the needle valve in it. So that's the new needle valve right here. But I do want to put the retaining clip in first. So there's going to be a shiny side and a dull side to this. You want the shiny side up. Put that in there. Excuse my focus. And then that screw goes right in there. Just like that. And there we go. And I usually use the bit by hand with the delicate work until I know that it's not cross-threaded, and then I just use a screwdriver here to give me a little bit more torque on it so I can put it in place. Again, make sure you do not over-tighten that. So that's in place, and then from here we're going to install the actual needle and the armature and the new 95-gram spring along with the pin. So give me a second to get those pieces all set up in here. I do need 2 hands just because the spring is going to be pushing out of this seat up against that armature while I'm putting it in there. So give me a minute here and I'll show you what the final piece looks like. So my methodology for putting the needle valve assembly together is putting the pin in the armature first. After that, you put the needle in the assembly, slide the armature arm through the needle, and you place the spring in, and what you do is you almost rotate it towards the spring when it's in the spring seat, and as you do that with your other hand, you can start to put in that screw. You are going to need 2 hands for it, and just double check, make sure everything works, and the spring works. So after this part, I'm going to put on the diaphragm. The diaphragm's really easy, just throw it on here, just like that. After that, we're going to put on the cover, which is fairly straightforward. This guy here has a little ear, goes like that. And then we put on our screws. Once you have the cover secure, you can then flip it over to the fuel pump side. And on the secondary carb, it's really straightforward to do this. We're going to put on this gasket here. We're going to place the fuel filter right there. And then from there you can place the cover. And then the remaining 4 screws, which are the longer screws, will secure this guy down. So the final step is installing the high and the low speed needles. I took the liberty of installing the new O-rings off screen. It's really straightforward. You just take off the old one and put on the new one. And then it's just figuring out which needle goes where. The one with the crossbar handle goes on this side with the cable cam, and the other one with the cap will go right there. Then what we have to do is you got to go look up in the manual to see how many rotations out and in both those needles have to be. I'll look that up in the manual real quick and then back those off the appropriate amount based off that documentation. From there, this one will be done, and then we will start working on the master. So to wrap up the secondary carburetor build, I just wanted to go over the tuning of this to the OE specifications in the manual. The low speed, which is the needle right here, this guy gets drawn all the way in and backed off 1 1/4 turn by hand. And the high speed needle is drawn all the way in to 0 and is not adjusted, so it should stay at 0. The cap here allows a quarter turn, but it doesn't recommend messing with that at all, so I'm not going to. So that just about wraps this rebuild up. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to message me down below and I'll answer them. Take care, guys.